Yeah, first off, just want to thank Lon and just want to thank everybody. I mean, I feel like everybody that's from this area knows this is kind of a special community. And when the Eagles won the Super Bowl and to see just the community come out on Broad Street and celebrate that in the parade, you know, it's a special thing. And we all have a special community within us as strength and conditioning professionals. And so I just want to welcome you guys here. I think all the presenters that have already gone have already, you know, we're all an open book in here, right? We all have influenced each other in some way, shape, or form along the road, and we're going to keep doing that, right, as we keep building and growing. And so I'm going to kind of get into this talk. I guess robust training means, I mean, that, you know, people are like, well, what are you going to talk about? You know, what are, I guess, you know, something you do often, right, is reflect, right, on your program. And that this past year, how do we do? What does our program look like? What do we do well? What can we improve on? And I think one of the things that always I keep coming back to, and I think John hit the nail on the head when he was talking about, you know, variety and variation and exposing his kids to all different types of stresses, whether it be kettlebells, Olympic lifting, power lifts. There's just so many different tools that we have out there. And that's really what I think I like to talk about when we get into robust training means. And, you know, the second thought that comes to mind with this is, you know, the recovery piece of training has really taken off, right? In the last 5 or 6 years, everybody wants to talk about recovery and recovery methods. And I don't ever want to take away from those methods and what they can do. But one of my first thoughts as a strength coach is let's build a more resilient athlete. Let's not worry about all the recovery methods. Let's just build a more resilient athlete. And the way that we do that is through exposing them to a robust means of different stress and stimulus along the road. So I'm going to kind of skip ahead a little bit. I'm going to come back to this slide. But, you know, in reflection, what do I think that we do well here? I think we do a good job in terms of the training is progressive, it's varied and specific. I think the training is robust, and I think we train hard. And I think at the end of the day, that's one of the things I think is a little bit of a beauty of finally some of the science that's coming out is, you know, in some cases we're not doing enough. We're not training hard enough or maybe intense enough to prevent the injuries that we want, to make the athlete that we want more resilient. I mean, think about all of us have probably done, you know, when was the first time you did a day of German volume training on squats, right? And what did you feel like the day after? And then the next time you did it, right, you felt a little bit better. You got a little more resilient to that type of stress. And those are the types of things that I think I'm kind of leading to with that. And then the last few things that I think that we've done well is kind of you know, breed a good culture of training within the facility. And I think there's a lot of different tools that we can use as coaches, but ultimately, you know, that makes or breaks it, right? If the kids, your kids or your athletes are bought into what you're doing and they're giving 100% effort, chances are they're going to get better, right? And so we have to continually do that. You know, just this past week, we had a bunch of new players that are going to come in this building in the start of the off season, and when they join our program, we got to make sure that they're bought in, right? That they're bought into our style of training, how we train to make them better on the field, to make them more resilient to injury and those types of things. And then these are just kind of some quick hitters at the end I was going to hit on was the competition piece. Autonomy within bounds is something that we talk a lot about as a staff, and then knowledge of performance versus knowledge of results. So we'll get into that. I'm going to go back to the first slide. This first slide is really just to kind of give you a view of kind of my background and some of the different things that I've been exposed to in my career. You know, I got my start way back when I was in college at the University of Nebraska, working with Mike Arthur, Boyd Epley, Dave Ellis, some of the early pioneers in the field of strength conditioning. So obviously I learned a ton there with those guys. Florida State, I saw some guys from Titus Sports Academy. So Dave Plettle, I don't know if you guys are familiar with him, but I've definitely learned a lot and was influenced by him. Jeff Fish was my first strength coach to work under in the NFL, and we did a lot with the functional movement screen, and that was new to me. I didn't know a thing about the functional movement screen until my time with him there. I went back to the University of Nebraska as the head nutritionist there, and that was really when I got to dive into the nutrition piece, really hardcore. Wrote a book on supplements, co-authored a book on supplements, worked with James Dobson. Jacksonville was where I worked with Tom Islinski, another great strength and conditioning coach in the NFL. Block periodization was, I got exposed to that there. Charlie Francis, AFL. And one of the themes I guess I'm trying to bring out with my background is that we're all on this continuum, right? Where we're continuing to learn. And James said it from Princeton. He was talking about how, come on out. He wants to learn from you. I think we're all here. That's why we're here on a Friday night, is to learn and to get better. And I mean, there's things that my paradigm and my lens of how I see strength and conditioning is still evolving. And it's one thing that I think makes me so passionate about this field, is because as you go more into this stuff, looking at movement, motor skill development, like all these different pieces, you can't help but just be a little bit in awe of like how we as coaches can influence long-term athlete development. And so these are some recent things, since I was with the Eagles, the PRI, postural restoration. Bill Knowles, he's right up the road, does a ton with reconditioning. Vern Gambetta's Gain Network. Some of the Franz Bosch stuff is what I've been reading a little bit lately. So again, just to maybe give you some ideas, if you're looking for things like, man, I want to get into a book or something like that, these are some things that I've come across that have helped me. So skipping ahead a little bit, periodization. Who likes periodization in the room? Yeah, everybody's hand should go up, right? We're strength coaches. We love periodization. I can't get enough of periodization. How do we plan out the best training for our teams and for our individual athletes, right? It's one of the beauties of it. So the first thing I did was threw up a study that basically kind of was a peer review article, and it basically said that periodization is worthless. Like it doesn't matter. And I think that that's one thing that we somewhat have to take with a grain of salt. And another way that it was said, and this probably sums up my view of periodization, because Ben and Keith, our guys, and they'll be the first to tell you that I love my macro cycle, right? I can't get enough of talking about this and how we're going to build this and that. But this sums it up. In practice, the way in which training leads to adaptation turns out to differ greatly from individual to individual, and even from time to time within a single individual. So, a perfect example might be, how many people in here have done 5-3-1? A lot of hands go up, right? So the first time you did 5-3-1, I don't know what your gains were, but I'm guessing that you had pretty good gains, and then you wanted to do it again, right? And then again. And then throughout that, you probably saw different results throughout the periodization. And I think that that's true a little bit with how we scheme and develop our plans and our programs with our athletes. Again, what it all comes down to is, I think periodization is really important. I think that we need to have a plan, but that plan isn't always going to be perfect for each and every one of our athletes. And we also have to take that with a grain of salt. And so when I look at periodization and look at what we try to do throughout our continuum and our macro cycle, is I think we keep it pretty dang robust. Do I like linear periodization? Yeah, I like linear. Do I like undulating? Yeah, I like undulating. Do I like dynamic effort and some of the stuff that they've done at Westside Barbell? Yeah, I like it. Do I like 5-3-1? Love it. These are just velocity-based stuff. I mean, I think it's all really, really good, and how we, as strength coaches and the artists of this whole thing, how we paint this thing is what's going to be one of the big differences as we move forward. So I probably would describe a lot of what we do more block periodization. So this is a review article by Ishrun. Any of our interns that come in, I love for them to read it, because I think it is one of the things is that all of our athletes are on a training continuum, right? We have guys that we get that I got guys that I get in the league in their rookie season that I think are babies when it comes to training maturity. They've been to colleges, been to really good strength and conditioning programs, but for whatever reason, their maturity in the weight room is very, very low. I have other guys that are really robust already. They've been exposed to a lot of different types of stresses, a lot of different really good programming and periodization and those types of things. And so those are some of the things that we have to blend as we go throughout it. So, you know, block, conjugated, I would say overall, my thought is I really like to blend several muscle characteristics or abilities trained together with a specific emphasis. So we like to do or term a lot of things block periodization and what we do with the Eagles, but within that is we're going to train multiple muscle characteristics, but we're going to have an emphasis within each block. Very similar to Ishran's block periodization model. So we never get away where we're not training specific things. Speed strength, we're hitting that, strength speed. We've got movements in there for that. Maximum strength, we hit blocks with that, those types of things. And basically all this thing gets laid out into what I call our annual plan or our annual macro cycle. And so again, what I think has been, what we've done well is like we've been able to create a robust look of different types of training and muscle characteristics. So for example, I'm going to start off and I'm going to talk about where we're at right now. Post Super Bowl, post off season, getting ready to start the season. So moving right here, you can see, and this is actually from 2016. So this is way back, blocking things all the way back into January. We recommend a lot of our guys take a break after the season, right? They need some time away to rest and recover. I think one of the biggest examples that always blows my mind in this is how many people know who Mo Farah is? The 800, 1500 meter runner, Olympic champion, pretty phenomenal athlete. Nobody can touch the guy. I mean, it's pretty I mean, if you watch the guy race, I'd stand there with my mouth kind of open. But every year, the guy doesn't run for 4 weeks. At the end of the season, he doesn't run. He's a distance runner. That's what he does. And that's one example to me of, wow, like rest and recovery is really important. So we recommend that our guys really get 2 weeks away, but 2 weeks might not be enough for certain players. Some of our guys might need 4 weeks. And so we try to devise a block of training that kind of meets that need for everybody. So we'll tell our guys, you know, hey, you could start block 1, maybe you need an extra week. You should start it 3 weeks in. Maybe you need 2 extra weeks. Start that 4 weeks in. And we basically build off of that first block. And the first block of training, what we try to do is a lot of mobility-focused stuff, a lot of low-level aerobic training activities, and basic weightlifting. This is where, like what John's doing with the kettlebells, we do a lot of kettlebell stuff. We do some time under tension training in that first block. We basically are slowing everything back down and kind of starting from square one, no matter what the level of training is for the athlete, if that makes sense. So again, just another example of we have all these tools, right? We can manipulate. How many different things can we manipulate in a single workout? Rest intervals between sets, the actual length of the repetitions, concentric, eccentric, isometric. I mean, it's pretty profound if you think about it. And these are all tools that we as coaches can use, I think, as we're building and developing athletes. So once we move out, and I'm going to talk and show you some video from that first block of mobility, because I really like some of the things that we're doing within that. Then we move into more of that base building, hypertrophy building block. That's really a lot of linear periodization. And once we move out of that block, we might move into an undulating periodization block where we expose our guys to a day of dynamic effort, explosive speed strength or strength speed type activities, a day of maximum strength, and a day of hypertrophy in a 3-day training block per week. Then the next block, we might go into more of a Charlie Francis high-low model where it's 4 weeks of more of a low day, upper, and some lower level tempo type work in terms of running, and then our high day work on the field. So again, we're really kind of trying to give our guys a lot of different types of things. So this is just kind of looking at the first week, but I'm going to skip past that, show you just a video. So I'm going to have Ben cue this video up. But basically, this is block 1 for us. This is our recovery block. We start each of the recovery blocks with what we call a mobility circuit. And I think you might have to, there you go. So within the mobility circuit, we do a lot of different things. We do some basic hurdle work that you're going to see through here. We're going to get into a lot of different things, but this is some stuff that we got from Bill Knowles. This is a sway drill. One of the things I love about this exercise is the hip internal rotation. So if I look at Randall's hip here, you can really see how he's working to get to the cone. So this is just basic stuff, but again, taking back all the high intensity stuff and just really slowing it down into some low level mobility type training. That's what we're really trying to get after this block. Now, our mobility circuits are kind of continuous. So the thing we like about that is that, you know, most of these guys are going to maintain a heart rate that's probably somewhere between 110 to 140, 130. It's probably not going to get up to 140 all that often. But again, they're getting that continuous stimulus of low-level cardiovascular work, which again is going to enhance recovery. And that's really what we want for our guys. We want moments of recovery. So we're really trying to ingrain good, solid movement patterns. We're getting them into postures. This is where we get into, like Dave mentioned, in the tumbling piece. We throw a lot of that in here, and our guys love it. You know, it's a break, right? From the if we grind it on the squat rack all year long, do you think eventually we'd hit the wall? We probably would, right? And the effort and just the buy-in and all those types of things wouldn't really be there the whole time. So. But again, so really early on, we call this block kind of more of like a recharge or a reload. But we're still getting good, solid work in, and we're doing a lot of different things. But any questions or anything while the video is kind of rolling?
Coach, you mentioned you have rest time, or you make the players take time off. How receptive are they to that?
Well, I think it obviously, the question was, you know, how receptive the players are to time off and taking time off at the end of the season. Quite honestly, it varies, right? I think all of us have different athletes and different, you know, you have your type A guys that basically, you know, you got to put the brake on them, right? Otherwise, they're going to train themselves in the ground all year round. And then you have the other guys that, man, you got to put a foot up the, you know what, otherwise they're not going to do anything for 3 months, and they're going to come back to you. And so it's kind of a different continuum. But so this is some of the time under tension stuff. You saw some of the Olympic lifting. You know, we start back with some of the early progressions. We do a lot of things off poles, off boxes, those types of things. So basically, you know, it's a great time for us to really step everything back a notch. And you can see the time under tension type stuff through the block. So, and we'll even do some close chain stuff, you know, basic leg curls, those types of things. Any other questions real quick? I think the video is about, this one I think is actually the last one. So again, this is just to kind of give you an idea of you know, just some of the different robust type things that we do throughout that first block of training. From there, I was actually going to kind of shift, and these actually were just some questions, I guess, some food for thought to maybe get the wheels turning a little bit. But First question would be, what are optimal durations of unloading for elite athletes in a yearly macro cycle? So like for us, within that first macro cycle, we really encourage our guys not to run, to not get out there and do a lot of sprinting or jumping or anything like that. We want them to take the time to, start from basics, reset the system, so to say. But that is a question I think that we have to ask ourselves a little bit. Second one, are high volumes or blocks of work beneficial for elite athletes? Is there a point at which this type of training becomes detrimental? So once we finish this recovery block, we tend to jump into more of a hypertrophy block, a pretty high volume block of training. And that's something that we as a staff always chew on this question. Well, does everybody need this? Is this going to be detrimental to some, depending on training age and how long that they've been in the program? And I think those are questions that we're chewing through. But at the same time, I think one thing that I always underestimate is the level of training that our guys have. And you'd be surprised. I think it's a lot lower ceiling than most of us think. So exposing them to some of these blocks, I think, is actually can be really good for them. And then, does the need for wide ranges of sport variability differ along the long-term athlete development continuum? So again, we're talking a lot about robustness, right, and variability, and kind of playing into that. I don't know if you guys saw with the Winter Olympics, but on average, I can't remember the exact percentage, but I think it was like some 70% of gold medalists. How many sports? They played 3 sports or more. So again, showing us that we need to train athletes, right? And sometimes if we focus too much on specialization, maybe we're doing the athlete a disservice. And that's what I loved about what John shared, John McKenna, with his high school athletes. He's not doing that. He's creating a robust athlete that can do everything. And I think that's the beauty of what we're trying to do as well. So next, I was going to kind of shift the thought into more this idea on the hamstring, right? So I think all of us, whatever sport you deal with, hamstring injuries tend to be, I know in the NFL, that's something that's very, very common. And so when it comes to the weight room and how we train the hamstring in the weight room, what are some different things? And this was just a slide. Some of you guys probably see this on Twitter and whatnot, but the different EMG signals of different exercises as it relates to the hamstring. One thing that you'll know with me is I think the number one thing that we can do to prevent hamstrings is to sprint and to run fast and to run fast often. And there's nothing that we're ever going to do in the weight room that's ever going to mimic that on the field. So with that being said, what are things that we can do to supplement? Because I think there is enough science to say that doing some eccentric loading training and developing eccentric strength of the hamstring can be a beneficial thing in terms of preventing hamstrings. So does that mean that our hamstring training means that, oh, well, if we do Nordic curls, we're good? Not in my opinion. And that, again, to me, comes back to this idea of robustness. So if I look at different variables I can manipulate on hamstring training, I can manipulate eccentric, concentric, isometric, speed, frequency, open versus closed chain. One thing that at least blew my mind was, so one thing we do is we do some Nordboard testing with our guys. And we found it to be really beneficial for the athlete to know what level of strength he has from a hamstring standpoint. We talk a lot about squat strength. I'm a big believer that what you measure and what you make important in your program, like Dave mentioned, they put a lot of value on the overhead squat, which is awesome. But what you do, or what things you measure and make a value, that's what your athlete's going to value. And so we tried to do that a lot with the Nordboard. And so one of the things that's a concern with the Nordboard is that sucker can leave your guys sore, right? And I don't want to send a guy out to the practice field with sore hamstrings, and then all of a sudden, if he has a small grade 1 or grade 2 hamstring strain, I'm worried that I put too much stress on the hamstring, right? So that was a learning process for us as we went. But one thing that I thought was really opened my ideas of the paradigm of this thing was, we asked a couple of guys from the Australian rules football teams, right? Well, how often do you guys do Nordboard? They do Nordboard. They test the Nordboard about 4 times a week. How often do you do Nordic curls? Oh, twice a week. Yeah, we 2x5. First day, the 2 days after the game. 2x3 is the second day. And in my head, I'm going, if I asked my guys to do Nordic curls that frequently, they would look at me like I was crazy, right? And that's one thing, like the inverse curl has been a game changer for us to really progress guys to that and to feel comfortable in terms of how we progress guys into a Nordic curl. But I guess what the point I'm trying to make with the AFL team is this idea that, sometimes a lot of it comes back to the expectation and what what you think or your athlete thinks in his mind is too much, or what it might not be true reality. Because I guarantee you those AFL guys are running and covering a lot more distance than our guys are on the field. Now, granted, they might not be doing, I'm sure they're doing a lot of sprinting and high-speed running as well, probably more than our guys do as well. But that has been an ingrained piece of their training culture. The Nordic curl is part of the culture. And so it's not out of the norm for them to do that. And that's one thing that I think we've come a long way, is it took time, but now that is becoming a part of our training culture and what we do, right? And there's other examples of that. But to me, I think the reason that sprinting is so important is because there's nothing we can do in the weight room that's going to mimic the speed, right? Nothing that's going to mimic the speed of contraction that the hamstring has to take on, some of the forces and whatnot that you're doing. So this next video is just to kind of give you an idea. Probably should have started this before I was rambling a little bit, just to give you an idea of some of the different things that we do. So to me, we do closed chain, we do open chain, we do things with speed, we do your typical glute ham raises, those types of things. We've shifted to do a lot more isometric work. We'll do some single leg work. The nice thing about the Nordboard is it does allude to like some imbalance between right and left, so we can use that with our guys a little bit. I just threw some sprinting in. We do sled pulls, the inverse curl. We've developed different progressions off of the inverse curl. So this is just kind of more of a typical inverse curl. And then the second exercise that you'll see Randall do is more of, it's like an inverse curl partial. The kettlebell swings, one thing I love about this is, I think it was Stuart McGill said once, he was talking about how often we train the speed of muscle contraction, but we don't often talk about the speed of muscle relaxation. And a lot of times when it comes to sprinting, and even like with a kettlebell swing, not only do you have to contract the hamstring and load quickly and create tension, you have to relax and let that tension go fast, which I think that's a key piece that is really important. And these are just some different progressions of high intensity running that we do, that our guys have to be able to handle. This was that inverse curl partial that I was telling you about, that we progress our guys into as they go. But long story short, I feel like what we're getting better at is figuring out what some of the good things are that we can be doing to train the athlete, but then at the same time also using the technology. People mention GPS, those types of things, if you have them, to really help get a good understanding of like what the demands are for our athletes, and then being able to prepare them for that are some key things. So these are just some of the isometric holds that we've been doing recently with some of our hamstring stuff. All right, so this would be the question, food for thought question. How much weight room emphasis should be placed on training the hamstring both off-season and in-season? Frequency, open versus closed chain, speed, slow, heavy, fast, eccentric, isometric, concentric. So chicken Pete's tonight. good conversation. If you guys are looking for something to get the conversation started. Does increased hamstring strength improve performance and injury resiliency? So another question that, food for thought. If I sprint, is that enough? Next one I had was kind of just this whole idea of core training. I think the core is obviously really important. I think we have to, same thing, we got to use robust means. We need to train the core ballistically, isometrically, create stiffness, train our athletes develop postural strength and positioning strength, and go from there. So this is just a video of some different things that we do just from an isometric. We call this a scat push-up walk, but basically ripping the dumbbell down to the hip. This is some of the co-contraction stuff. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but like the Franz Bosch stuff and John Pryor, the Japanese rugby strength and conditioning coach that we mentioned. Some of your standard Greg Cook, chop and lift. Farmer's walks, knocking those out. Or this is more of a suitcase carry, sorry. And typically, we're going to train the core every day. And I'm sure some of you guys like to use it within your warm-up and programming. I'm probably shifting more to where I really like things like this that require, to create stiffness, isometric contractions, and then, put people in different postures and positions that are going to be required to do and be in on the field as athletes. And I would say we probably, from a ballistic standpoint, we really try to do a lot of medicine ball work, medicine ball throws, those types of things. We vary stance with the medicine ball work, so everything from kneeling to half kneeling to, whatever the case may be. It was funny because, so obviously, most of you guys might know who Jason Peters is, right? All-pro, left tackle, pretty impressive dude, right? So for whatever reason, JP's, we call these alligator walks, but JP's been calling guys out on this, like, because he wants to race to see who can get down and back the fastest. But to watch a guy that's probably, 300 some pounds be able to get in a position and hold himself, and he makes us shake our heads every day, some of the things that guy can do. So. But again, I think John said it best, it's not rocket science. A lot of it's just, in my opinion, a lot of it's just good training, right? And, we want to talk a lot about sports and, just about technology, right? And whatever you want to term it. But what technology enables us to do is hopefully be better coaches and to make the training better through better progression, better balance, those types of things. It's not necessarily the technology alone that is really doing anything special for us. So that's what I think is kind of important. So similar questions. I won't spend a lot of time. Similar to the hamstring, how much time and energy should be devoted to developing core strength, stability, coordination? Are compound movements enough? I mean, there was a point in my career where, I was like, well, we squat without belt, so I don't need to do any extra core work. And hey, there's nothing wrong with that. I know that you get a lot of core work and development. Some of the unilateral loaded stuff that John was doing with the kettlebell, I think that stuff's phenomenal. I don't know if you're going to get better core training than some of that stuff that he was showing us in there. So again, just some different food for thoughts. Then kind of moving over into this idea of power development. So we do a lot of the velocity-based training. So throughout a typical season, right, we might shift into a block. We typically do like more of a maximum strength block, maybe one time in the off season, and then we might come back to it one time in the in season, and then we'll usually jump into more of our strength speed or speed strength. So again, kind of one of the things I guess I wanted to show with this was like we do a lot of robust stuff. We do plyometric type work. We do medicine ball throw type work. We do all the variations off the Olympic lifts. We do contrast training. We do banded stuff. And again, it's not like it's a mixed match of all these different things, but it's just to show that I think we have a lot of tools, and our job is to be able to help all of our athletes to use the tools to make them more powerful, make them more explosive, those types of things. So I think one of the beauties of it all is obviously it's huge. Like the Olympic lifting stuff is great. The medicine ball stuff is great. I was out at Altus just this past week, and one of the things that I thought was pretty, Dan Paff had said that I thought was pretty profound was that if you can't project an implement, then you can't project your body. And that really, I thought that was pretty powerful, right? When it comes to these medicine ball throws, if you can't project a medicine ball or whatnot, how are you going to be able to throw and stuff? And a lot of this stuff is like a lot of the plyos that you're seeing, we don't just jump and throw our guy into a depth jump double hurdle hop. There's progression to that, right? We might start with simply stepping off of a box and landing. And then after we do a block of that, then we transition into a single hurdle to box type jump. If that makes sense. So again, it just comes back to being smart in terms of your progression, but at the same time, don't be afraid to be aggressive and to train hard and to challenge your athletes. That's what they want. I mean, these guys are the elite of the elite, right? They're athletes. They should be able to do these things. And I think that's one thing I think that it's really hard for all of us in the room that are at the NFL level is it's easy to get scared, right? And to not want to train. Or just to be fearful that, hey, the last thing I can do is hurt a guy in the weight room, right? And we get it, but I don't think we can train scared. I think we should be more scared if we're putting the athlete out there unprepared physically because we didn't do enough for him in the weight room and in his training and in his preparation. One of the guys that I think was a huge testimony for this is, have you guys are familiar with Patrick Robinson? He was our nickel corner this year, right? So Patrick came to us. He was coming off of a sports hernia. But of all the players that we've probably worked with, I think most of us would say watching that guy get confidence back in his body physically that you could tell maybe he had never had in his NFL career was phenomenal. I mean, this guy's hitting PRs in the bye week before the Super Bowl, and it's just like this continuous, power output's going up on everything that we measure, max strength levels going up, and then the guy himself, just you can see the self-confidence, right? And that's one of the beauties of what we develop too, right? This resilience, a physical resilience and mentality in our athletes that I think is pretty powerful. And so I'm going to kind of get away. I'm not going to spend any time on this. This is just a kind of a look. You want to play the video, Ben? This is like a typical high day for us. So, and this kind of brings in this whole idea of competition. So at the top, you can see we're doing just a basic ring drill with some breakaway belts. And at the bottom, we're doing some hurdle hops to sprint. And then we're going to progress into some mini hurdle type things. So, I would call this, in my opinion, this is a pretty advanced plyometric, right? So I think, but at the same time, I guess I take a lot of pride knowing that our guys are able to do a pretty dang advanced, high-level plyometric And I think that goes back to some of the resilience. Now, the second thing that I think has been really something that we've really tried to do is really build off this whole idea of competition. And I don't think, I'm not a believer in making everything a competition, but I think that we want to prepare our guys, not just physically, but mentally for competitive environments. Because all of us know the athlete, right? That's the training warrior that once he gets out on the field, you know, he shits the bed a little bit. And that's not what the kind of athlete we want to develop. We want them to be ready to handle those types of competition scenarios. And it might be a competition that they know that the odds of them winning are very low, but they need to find a way to win, and they need to find a way to go out there and compete. And then the second thing that I think is really changing our paradigm of training in terms of movement is this whole idea on this difference between agility and change of direction. So a lot of you guys have probably seen a lot of this recent research that's coming out, like the perceptual, cognitive, decision-making piece of movement and change of direction is really pretty unbelievable. And if we're not training that, then we're probably doing a disservice to our athlete. We had a guy, a friend of mine, Corey Van Wyk, he showed us some different drills, and I'm going to jump ahead. This was one example of the drills. Ben actually did this with a couple of our guys. Oh, anyway. But yeah, this is a very simple drill, but this is a link to some of Corey's drills. But basically you can see it's just a reactive drill. And what Corey's done really well, so Corey's at a small college in Iowa, but he's basically developed a multitude of reactive drills that are very specific to the demands of football, but then aren't always one-on-one scenarios, but could be multiple athlete scenarios, because all of a sudden if you're an offensive lineman and there's 5 guys, that totally changes the dynamic of movement, doesn't it? That changes the way I make decisions on the field and how I'm going to move. And so this is a lot. I thought, last season we did some good things in terms of our progression of moving into more reactive type drills. I don't know if you guys noticed it, but Ben was kind of doing the mini hurdle drill. Well, we made that reactive. So there was one guy made one move back, and then the other guy responded, and then it was a race to the end. Or we did a lot of chaser drills from various positions, guys reacting to those types of things. But my thought process and what we've talked about is, well, how can we progress this and take this even further? Corey mentioned an example of where he had 2 players, right? And he times them in flying 10s. And one player was clearly faster in a straight up flying 10 than the other player. But if you put him in any type of reactive drill, the slower player beat the faster player. And I think that just goes to show us, like, this is an important dimension of decision making and training that we need to start blending together, because we need the fast guy to not only be fast, but then also to be fast cognitively and to pick up some of those perceptual cues that are going to make him a better decision on how to move and how to best get to different positions. Does that make sense? So I'm going to kind of shift ahead to last couple thoughts, and then I'll just keep it open with some questions. So, the first thing, or actually we're going to get to the competition piece. So the next thing I wanted to highlight was on this whole idea of autonomy within bounds. So the last slide that I showed you, so this is a guy, Wade Gilbert. If you're into like some of the coaching stuff and like, I don't know, some people don't want to talk about culture. Some people want to call it something else now, whatever. But Wade is one of those guys. He's one of the guys that coaches coaches. So he actually puts together a journal. It's the International Journal of Coaching. And so I think Wade is really good when he thinks about like what are the aspects of building a great team. And his website's at the bottom. There's a couple of videos that he has that I think are pretty phenomenal. But these are some of the core things that Wade talks about and that I really get a kick out of. But One of the things that he talks about is this idea of like buy-in, trust with the athlete, and that's one thing that I think autonomy really gives us. And James mentioned it a little bit. So, for example, in our scenario with the elite athletes, not all my guys can back squat. I've got guys that have some, low back pathologies. I'm not going to put a bar on the back. Risk reward, not worth it. I'm going to find something else. A lot of other ways to develop strength. So I'm going to go a different route. But within that, there might be a conversation with the athlete in terms of, okay, this block we're looking to develop maximum strength. That's the muscle characteristic quality we're going after. These are the 3 different exercises that I think would be a really good fit. What do you want to do? Oh, yeah, you know what? Single leg Bulgarian, yeah. And then all of a sudden the athlete feels like he has ownership and a part in some of the programming, and I guarantee he's going to work a lot harder for you, and he's going to be bought in a little bit more on that program. So that's what I love about this whole idea with autonomy within bounds. Like sometimes I think as coaches we're a little bit afraid to give too much autonomy. And don't get me wrong, I think it all depends on the scenario, because I think in a college setting, sometimes you got to take away all that autonomy because the athlete doesn't know what he doesn't know. He hasn't been exposed to enough things to really understand the complexities and what all the different options are. But once he gets to a certain point, he probably has developed a place where you trust him as a coach, and he's earned that right to have some autonomy. And it could be anything from the different mobility exercises. There's a lot of different ways that we can work on mobility through the hip flexor, right? So maybe you work with the athlete, give him some autonomy on that, and then it comes back tenfold for you on the back end in terms of buy-in, credibility, all those things that you're trying to build in a strong environment. So autonomy within bounds. Next one, knowledge of result versus knowledge of performance. So this was a thought that came out of that Franz Bosch book, and it's an example of these 2 throwers. Right? I think they were discus throwers, right? And they did a study. They basically gave one group of discus throwers the best coach. So this is knowledge of performance. I'm going to coach you on the technique of how to throw a discus, and you're going to have the best coaching technique that you can possibly get. The other group, they just got a tape measure. Knowledge of result. All I know is how far I threw the disc. Now I'm going to figure out how to throw it farther, because I know how far I threw it that first time. So in what we do, I think that there needs to be a really good balance of the 2 of those, right? There's obviously the technical aspect and the outcome, and this is another good quote, like we can't always throw out the process and look at the outcome. So I can't always look at like my force plate numbers and say, oh, well, the force output was X. There is a process in how that force was developed that might be good and might not be good. So I need to take that into consideration. But basically, when they did the study on the 2 groups of shot putters, they found that both improved to about the same extent. And what I think the power in that shows us just how important feedback is for the athlete. Knowledge of result. So, some of the velocity-based stuff, we're really fortunate. We have those elite form units that measure bar speed and those types of things. But what are ways that you can give feedback to your athletes? Because, once you set that target, like I'm sure Coach Feely, once you set the target of a bodyweight overhead squat, I mean, guys were finding a way to get that, right? They were going to make sure they hit that bar that you set. And that's one thing that I think, we've done well here, is that even though they're a professional NFL athlete, we know what their max is. We're pushing their limit. And one of the things that, we felt like this year was kind of an aha moment was looking at our strength development throughout the season. And one of our goals is to make sure that all of our guys are at least hitting 85 or above from a strength standpoint all throughout the season. And that was something that we did a good job of maintaining. And we had guys that hit 90 to 100%. And that's where it's so variable in this game, right? So people would ask, well, what's your goal in season? Is it maintenance or does it get better? You know what? It just depends. Like some of our guys, they might play 30 snaps And if they're playing 30 snaps or less, they can probably get stronger in season on a 2-day-a-week training program. If they're playing 60 or 70 snaps, if I can maintain, I'm doing pretty darn good. And I bet, you know what? There's probably too much stress. I don't think they're probably even going to be able to maintain. I'm just, you know, limiting attrition is what I'm trying to do at that point. So it is largely variable. But I guess my thing with the whole knowledge of result is to like challenge. That's something that I think that we're always thinking through is like, how can we give more feedback? Something to really kind of keep pushing the athlete, pushing the envelope. You know, we always have the power feedback, so chain squat data, chain bench data, banded bench data, Olympic lifts. Like we have all this information that we can be sharing and pushing to the athlete, knowledge of result to get better, to push them to get better and to raise the bar higher. So that was the second thing with that. And then the last one I had was just that whole competitive piece. This was just some footage of some competitive stuff that we did. Usually we finish off a lot of our training sessions like this, broke the guys up into teams. You know, we did something, I know a lot of colleges are doing this where you have, you know, a point system and you're keeping track of points. You know, we had parking lot spaces that we gave away to competition winners within the line group, the big skill group and the skill group. And then we gave out T-shirts to guys that won individual competition rewards. You guys know, dudes love T-shirt, right? I mean, they will covet that thing, and that'll be in the, there it is, there it is. So anyway, so that's one of the things, and then this is another one that I really love to show because to me, this is where, you know, it's one thing to do competitive things in your weight room, but then the whole goal is to eventually to take that onto the field. And that was one of the things I thought was cool this year is Doug did a lot more of that, where he took the competitive stuff out to the field. And whether it was individual drills, making those competitive, or making the team drills competitive, all of us coaches, I guess, that were with the team, the bye week before we played the Super Bowl, if you guys could have seen some of the intensity at some of those practices and the way the offense and the defense were competing in those practices leading up, you know, they knew we weren't going to be playing a game that weekend and that we needed good quality work. And the intensity was high, the guys pushed each other, and I think that's just a testament to the guys, the locker room, the team, everything. But, you know, a competitive environment is huge. And what I love about this video is I don't know that you can get a much more intense environment when you have every one of your peers around you in this thing watching you one-on-one against a defender or an offensive player, right? I mean, to me, those are the environments that you want a guy to be in, because then when he's on the field in front of 75,000 people or whatever, you know, he's going to thrive in that because he's been there. Or at least you've tried to create something that was similar to that. So with that, that's all I got. I'll just open it up to questions, and then we'll head over to Chicky and Pete's.
Have you had a situation where you've gotten an athlete while you're in the middle of the block? I don't suspect it would happen often, but if you've had it, how do you adapt to that sort of situation?
Yeah, I think that's where practicality just kind of, the question was when we get a new athlete in the middle of a block. And so obviously we don't know the training background of the athlete. He obviously hasn't built up into a lot of the things that we're doing. You know, even like Brian Mann on some of the velocity-based stuff, you know, Brian would say, well, you need a base level of strength. So there probably is a certain criteria of, you know, being able to squat 2 times body weight or 1.5 times your body weight before you would even start doing VBT type training. But to be honest with you, most of the time we'll talk to the athlete, what he's familiar with. We're not going to have a guy, especially in season, we tend to be a little bit more cautious. So if a guy's hasn't been back squatting, we're going to find probably an alternative exercise that fits into the block that is something that he's familiar with, and then maybe we'll try to add speed with. So there's probably not you know, every situation is probably handled depending on what we feel like is the best interest of the athlete.
You talked about that speed of muscle contraction and speed of muscle relaxation thing. How do you train the speed of muscle relaxation? And what block do you usually incorporate?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that stuff so the question was, how do you train the rate or speed of muscle relaxation and muscle contraction? I think, you know, some of the stuff, if you've seen any of Cal Dietz's stuff, he talks about a lot about the oscillatory type methods of training. So I think those are different types of things where he's actually going through a limited range of motion, but he's as fast as possible. Things like that. So we might do some things like some shoulder stability work that might be in that. Like some of that banded stuff. I don't know if you saw, we had one of our guys, he was doing switches like that. Some of the kettlebell swing type stuff. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't say that we have a block. I think that we actually target that thing specifically, but we are looking for exercises that are going to challenge that type of that demand. Yep.
This is a coaching question. So, if you're just looking at your career, think about your most difficult athlete to get buy-in from. What did that require you to do to create that buy-in? So, you know, it could be with the Eagles, it could be any past programs, but
Yeah.
what was it that you were able to do with that athlete to create that buy-in into your program?
Yeah. So the question was about buy-in, like what in my past career, what has been the most difficult situation of developing buy-in, and how did you get the athlete to buy in? I think you got to pull out all the stops. You know, I think it comes back to trust and getting the athlete. Sometimes you got to meet the athlete in the middle, and sometimes they're not going to come full circle into your continuum. But I also think one of the things we need to do more as coaches is and one thing that I think has helped us a lot here is empower the peer-to-peer relationships, because I think those relationships are more powerful than any coach-to-athlete relationship, quite honestly. I think they're more influential. And so empowering the guys that we know can potentially get to that athlete, I think can be really, really powerful. And then, again, taking baby steps. You know, you know, one of the things that we've seen is that sometimes year one, you get a guy this far, and then year two, he takes a big stride and is really bought in to everything that you're doing. But it takes time, and each guy can be unique in how that happens.
So, Coach, how do you deal with situations when an athlete might come from a school or another NFL team where they're not doing Olympic lifts, and they come to you and maybe they are doing them, they have really bad form, or even more so, let's say they aren't doing them at all, and they're like at a kid's school, and they come to you, you give them that autonomy to choose certain exercises which will develop explosiveness, or you go to square one and teach them with the bar?
Yeah. So the question was, when we get new athletes that have been in programs that were not Olympic lifting or doing a lot of that type of training, you know, how do we handle those situations? Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say we encourage the guys to we'll walk the progression back. So maybe let's start with just a shrug or a pull, or yeah, maybe you haven't done this in the past. I mean, a lot of times guys will come to us and they'll be like, yeah, I haven't done that since college, but I think I'd like to do that again. And then they start doing it. And Torrey Smith was a good example of that this past year. I mean, that guy loved getting back into the Olympic lifts, felt really good and explosive doing them. But it was just, you know, he just hadn't really done a ton of that since he got into the NFL for whatever reason. But in some cases, when the technique is terrible and those types of things, we'll shift to a medicine ball. And that's where the coach has got to know when to make that call and when not.
I saw the mention of Postural Restoration Institute. How have you integrated that into your program?
We found like the PRI stuff has been, the question was, how do we integrate the postural restoration stuff into our programming? we found, I think, a lot of the stuff you can integrate in some of the overall coaching in terms of thoracic position, breath, those types of things in how you're coaching a general exercise. And I think we've done some of that stuff. I mean, we've tried to discourage excessive extension and hyperinflation, but at the same time, trying to help guys find position and to find some of those obliques and to use the breath to engage abdominals, those types of things. But most of it has been on more of like that one-on-one basis. A guy's got some chronic stuff, like all of a sudden, man, I'm getting some tendonitis on this side, or I'm getting this or that, or it might be checking them or screening them. So like, you know, we use the extension drop test to look at asymmetry a lot of times, and it's just a real quick, fast, easy, simple way to check a guy, and then all of a sudden you see some asymmetry, and you can see it when the guy squats, how he positions his feet, and then all of a sudden you're like, wow, he's lateralized to the right side. That's right within thoughts of postural restoration. And so, and then, you know, all right, let's see what we can do. Get after left hamstring, left adductor, but it is hard because quite honestly, the corrective stuff in PRI is it's more complex than coaching a clean. And to get the athlete to find the positions and the breath and the activation it's really hard. But it can be powerful in terms of how you can change. Yeah. Yeah, so the question was, how much differentiation do we use amongst position groups? I would say between the quarterbacks and the kickers, there's a pretty drastic variation. And then we typically break in between our skill, big skill in line. However, most of the time, we would probably shift our tight ends more with the skill guys and our linebackers more with the line guys in that type of deal. But I wouldn't say that there's a ton of variation. There might be a little bit more unilateral or single leg emphasis in some of our skill positions, but we find that our big guys need that just as much as our skill guys do. And so, I don't know. So there is some, but you know, I wouldn't say that it's a super drastic amount.
Do you do any training that focuses on cognitive reaction time? So not just sport specific where they're doing an agility drill, but a true focusing on cognitive reaction.
So the question was, do we do any type of reaction drill that focuses strictly on cognitive reaction time? So I guess, I don't know if this is your question. I view some of the cognitive reaction time as working the speed, visual, context type stuff. I'm not personally, we've had some of that stuff in there. I'm not really a huge believer in that stuff. I think put them in game-like situations where they're reacting to other athletes, the ball, a game, those types of things. I don't know if there's as much out of those. Well, hey, I appreciate you guys coming out, and we'll see you over at Chicky and Pete's. All right.